Flies droned over a field of stakes. A mailed rider muffled his mouth, breathing shallowly. Wind rattled wooden shafts, and one splintered pole creaked as if alive, tilting under its burden. Veterans, men who had seen winter sieges, gagged into sleeves and stared at the horizon's haze. At the center rose a taller stake, a turban still perched, a final insult to a fallen commander. Drums far away thudded once, then faltered. Even sound seemed to step back from this theater. No trumpet was needed. The message traveled faster than a dispatch. Terror is the policy here. It's worth noting this scene is reconstructed from hostile sources, yet its logic feels chillingly plausible. Who engineers fear so methodically that even seasoned soldiers forget how to stand upright? The immediate effect was unmistakable. Courage bled away before swords ever met. Discipline turned brittle. Camp rumors swelled, and caution replaced momentum. An army's spine softened by one grotesque panorama. Some called it barbarity, others strategy. Both words miss how spectacle can colonize the mind. The stakes did more than punish the dead. They conscripted the living into silence and hesitation. To understand how terror became a ruler's instrument, we have to return to the borderlands that forged him, where a boy under a dragon banner learned which monsters survive. The Balkans in mid-15th century lived like a clenched jaw grinding empire against kingdom. Caravans carried silk and salt, soldiers carried taxes, ultimatums, and the promise of winter campaigns. Frontiers weren't lines on parchment. They were villages burned, bridges guarded, and oaths tested every harvest. A prince was born to Vlad Dracula, whose crest bore a dragon, oath-bound to defend Christendom. Titles sounded grand, but borders raised children with alarms. Steel at dawn, riders at dusk, whispers nightly. Courts traded hostages as insurance. Alliances were quilts stitched from fear, debt, and necessary hypocrisy. Chroniclers disagree on details, yet they agree on pressure. Sovereignty here was perpetually provisional. How does a child decide who he is when every banner claims his loyalty by force? The near-term consequence was formative. Normal life equaled militarized routine, and empathy narrowed under constant threat. Merchants demanded stability. Magnates demanded obedience. Preachers demanded righteousness. Each sermon sharpening the politics of survival. From an early age, pageantry mixed with panic. Processions glowed while rumors gnawed at the edges. This is a neutral observation, not praise. Borderland stability often rewards the most decisive disciplinarian. Soon, diplomacy would ask for living guarantees. Two brothers would ride east as pledges, bridging us to captivity, instruction, and the hard apprenticeship of fear. They rode east under watch, not honor. Boys exchanged like promissory notes between anxious courts. Rooms smelled of oil and leather. Instructors drilled posture, archery, language, and the arithmetic of tribute. Tutors praised obedience. Jailers measured it. Kindness arrived with conditions. Discipline arrived without apology or delay. Letters home were filtered. News returned late, bent by diplomacy and sharpened by rumor's teeth. Ancient sources report that the brothers adapted differently. Accounts differ, yet the split feels historically plausible. Radu learned the music of survival, smiling on cue, winning allies with edges hidden beneath courtesy. Vlad studied edges openly, absorbing how command rides on spectacle, schedules, and very public consequences. What identity survives when every kindness doubles as a leash and every smile prices your freedom? In the near term, trust hardened into performance. Sincerity became risky. Calculation became daily bread and water. This is a neutral note. Captivity teaches efficiency. Feelings shrink, signals grow, and masks become muscle memory. He learned maps of fear. Who bends for coin, who bends for pain, and who never bends. When release finally came, the world felt narrower, colder, useful knowledge, costly lessons, and a tally to settle. To see how those lessons turned into policy, we have to examine the method he perfected, punishment arranged as theater, calibrated not for death but for memory. Carpenters matter in this story. Terror needs logistics, timber, angles, spacing, and a stage with sightlines. Old chronicles disagree on mechanics but converge on intent. Prolong dread, multiply rumor, harvest paralysis. He learned that cruelty, once systematized, behaves like infrastructure, expensive to build, powerful to maintain, devastating to dismantle. Scouts chose approaches visible from roads. Crews raised forests of warning where wind could carry whispers. Scribes were part of the machine. A punishment witnessed by dozens becomes policy witnessed by thousands. What happens when penalty stops judging the guilty and starts recruiting the innocent as terrified spectators? In the short run, villages policed themselves with panicked zeal. Fugitives found fewer doors and colder hearths. Neutral observation. This is strategy, not mystique, an operations manual disguised as vengeance and wrapped in folklore. The method flattened negotiations. Envoys weighed pride against nightmares, and many chose hats in hand over valor. To commanders, it offered a grim calculus. Frighten one column now, save a battle later. Cost deferred. Rumors outran horses. Exaggeration did unpaid work, turning dozens into thousands whenever fires flickered on hills. He did not invent pain, but he optimized its audience, proof that cruelty scales when spectacle becomes doctrine. Soon, a private grief would fuse with this public machinery. The deaths of his father and brother would ignite a campaign where fear met vengeance head on. News traveled on frightened horses, a father cut down, an elder brother silenced in earth. Ancient sources report the killers were local magnates. Accounts differ, but the treachery feels consistent. Messages arrived late, then doubled back with contradictions, until grief hardened into something colder than sorrow. He tallied names by candlelight, those who watched, those who helped, those who profited afterward. In border politics, mourning rarely pauses duty. Vengeance often masquerades as justice and recruits eager sponsors. Who does a prince become when the crown and the coffin arrive in the same season? The immediate result was kinetic. Hesitation vanished, and his plans compressed from years into months. He courted patrons with calculated humility, promising order, tribute, and a spectacular discouragement of conspirators. This is a neutral observation. Trauma can simplify strategy. One enemy becomes the template for all enemies. He learned to speak in outcomes, not apologies, in schedules, not sentiments, in signals, not speeches. Old loyalties felt counterfeit. New ones were checked with small, ruthless experiments in fidelity. Rumor turned helpful, since rumor magnifies courage and cruelty alike. Whichever arrives first wears the crown longer. His correspondence thinned, his ledger thickened. The arithmetic of payback tutored him more than any priest. By the time doors opened in his homeland, he stepped through like a verdict, not a petitioner. And soon he would seize a chair still warm with betrayal. One short reign to preview the discipline he planned to normalize. He reached the throne room briefly, a guest in his own house with armed escorts. The seal impressed wax. The room smelled of tallow, cold iron, and impatient advisors. Weeks behaved like hours, petitions stacked high while scouts tracked borders nobody fully controlled. He tested courtiers with assignments that measured loyalty, deliver taxes, raise levies, return with receipts. A few failed publicly. Punishments followed on schedule, less for cruelty than for calibration. Neutral note: short reigns reward strong signals. Clarity buys time, ambiguity buys conspiracies you cannot afford. What ruler chooses mercy when his title balances on knives and borrowed favors? The near-term effect was stark. Quarrels quieted, markets reopened cautiously, and letters resumed crossing mountain passes. Merchants complained softly, then complied. Magnates counted nephews and reconsidered where they wintered their ambitions. He framed obedience as insurance, cheap now, ruinously expensive later, an actuarial tone disguised as piety. Riders carried lists, carpenters measured timber, and scribes prepared formulae that made sentences read like contracts. He did not yet unleash the full theater, but trailers rolled, scenes designed to linger. All of it rehearsed a politics where pain instructed faster than decrees or oaths. Soon, an incident with a thief would test the doctrine in flesh and salt, an instructive cruelty that announced the legal philosophy to come. He chose a thief, not a prince, to define the kingdom's new grammar. The man had stolen more than bread, so leniency would only invite experiments. Witnesses gathered in the square, guards kept distance, and a tray of implements waited. Chronicles split on details, but converge on purpose. Make pain an unmistakable public syllabus. The punishment fixated the crowd, mixing nausea with relief that it wasn't their day. He spoke briefly about law, order, and the price of testing boundaries during troubled years. This is a neutral observation. Demonstrations work because people remember the feeling, not the words. What lesson spreads faster than one written on bodies and retold at every hearth? The immediate effect was orderly markets and guarded smiles. Night thefts dipped for several weeks. Merchants praised stability with careful voices. Villagers adjusted their curfews and door bolts accordingly. Carpenters noted measurements. Officials noted names. Rumor noted that indulgence had been replaced by schedule. He framed the act as civic schooling, not cruelty. Deterrence advertised with austere, bureaucratic vowels. Petitioners arrived earlier, papers ready. Even the hesitant learned which signatures mattered most. From spectacle, he advanced to structure, planning a purge masked as celebration and renewal. Invitations would go out for a feast, and the guest list would become a ledger. The feast arrived on Easter, a calendar of mercy repurposed as an engine of control. Candles flared along walls, musicians tuned, goblets gleamed, and invitations promised reconciliation. Boyars entered in velvet and suspicion, scanning corners for enemies and exits both. Doors closed softly, chains spoke louder. Hospitality turned with one decisive click of iron. Accounts differ on numbers, yet converge on choreography. Elders separated, youths sorted by strength. The frail met sentences on the spot. The able were marched toward mountain works. He addressed the hall with clipped piety, naming treacheries and debts that demanded balanced ledgers. Neutral observation. This fused purge and policy, decapitating factions while acquiring a workforce without negotiations. What ruler leaves knives in rooms where conspirators dine and pretends they aren't sharpening them? Immediate effect. Noble networks shattered, estates emptied, and councils learned to meter every whisper. Families diluted influence as heirs vanished. Petitions arrived without signatures that once blocked reforms. The event functioned as administrative refactoring, turning a fractious nobility into warning and precedent. Survivors carried the morality play home, repeating its lesson at firesides for a decade. He now faced merchant cities backing rivals. The next message would be written in smoke. Brasov prospered on tolls and timber, a ledger city guarded by mountain passes. Its guilds backed his rival. Its presses minted rumors that bit harder than arrows. He answered commerce with fire, selecting suburbs first so witnesses outnumbered the flames. Storehouses cracked. Bells rang late. Streets filled with ash and bargaining that smelled desperate. Chroniclers disagree on exact losses, but converge on purpose. Dismantle confidence, then negotiate. He posted proclamations that sounded judicial, even as smoke lifted like signed receipts. Merchants watch prices, not sermons. Here, prices measured fear better than any council vote. What message burns brighter than law read aloud? Law demonstrated where insurance cannot reach. In the near term, caravans rerouted, guild elders softened, and credit tightened across valleys. Captains revised risk tables. Border villages learned which banners truly guaranteed tomorrow's markets. It bears saying plainly, this was policy by spectacle, logistics wrapped in theater, unsentimental. He turned setbacks into script, teaching rivals that defiance carried expenses payable in kind. Scribes cataloged names, quartermasters counted mules, witnesses carried inventory lists covered in soot. Abroad, princes took note. At home, magnates understood that letters could no longer shield them. Soon he would change the stage again, trading smoke for silence and fear for appetite, an infamous meal arranged among steaks. Tables were set where warnings stood, a banquet threaded between rows of wooden sentences. Bread broke, wine poured, attendants moved like actors hitting marks on a perilous stage. He ate deliberately, glancing at standards and schedules more than the trembling horizon. Some sources frame this as madness. The staging reads colder, closer to curriculum than frenzy. He governed by impression, and this tableau compressed 100 proclamations into one enduring shiver. Musicians faltered, then continued. The score itself seemed drafted by a clerk of dread. Which commander eats within sight of punishment, if not to condition every witness present? Immediately, subordinates internalized priorities, orders on time, ledgers exact, and consciences postponed for winter. Envoys imagined their own audiences and adjusted tone. Threats lost volume, courtesies gained urgency. The garrison learned that obedience here meant calendar discipline, not occasional heroics or lyrical pledges. It's important to note the craft. The scene targeted morale, not flesh already beyond hearing. Rumor amplified it, converting a meal into a movable shrine of administrative terror. Even allies grew careful with jokes. Silence began performing work that knives previously managed. He had proven spectacle could steer strategy. Now the numbers would travel faster than riders. Next comes arithmetic, where exaggeration multiplies terror and pamphlets turn dozens into the legend of thousands. Numbers began marching faster than armies, pamphlets and woodcuts crossing mountains with breathless arithmetic. German presses adored the macabre. Broadsheets multiplied figures until they felt heavier than facts. Some tracts claimed tens of thousands on stakes. Others implied a fifth of a people vanished. Ancient sources report many totals. Accounts differ wildly, which is telling in its own bleak way. Scribes sketched forests of poles, each drawing converting rumor into memory that traveled by market day. Merchants repeated figures with ledgers open. Priests repeated them with flinches between clauses and psalms. When does a statistic stop informing and start recruiting us into the fear it describes? In the short term, the exaggeration served him. Reputations ride quicker than couriers and rarely tire. Rivals recalculated marches. Captains trimmed ambitions. Peasants weighed neutrality like coin on a careful scale. To be clear, this is analysis, not praise. Propaganda is a technology, and it worked. The math blurred guilt and scope, making isolated theaters appear like a continental policy unfolding. Numbers intimidated creditors and councils alike. Even allies hedged, speaking in smaller promises and safer tenses. He learned that terror compounded with interest when printed, traded, and sung across valleys. Soon, the arithmetic would meet protocol. Dignity and custom would collide with his doctrine of spectacle. Envoys were arriving, hats fixed by faith and pride, to negotiate tribute and to discover how sovereignty would be staged here. They entered with turbans intact, as law and devotion required. He received them without softening posture. Requests came formally, tribute due, hostages expected, gestures of submission outlined like an annual tax. His reply was the room itself, guards unmoved, carpenters nearby, and a measured silence after courtesies. Accounts diverge on phrasing, but converge on message. Customs may stay, provided they never challenge authority. He ordered nails to keep the turbans properly in place, a grim etymology for sovereignty. Gasps carried down the corridor. The act married sarcasm to suffering, marrying law to spectacle. Where does negotiation end when dignity is nailed to a skull and called procedure? Immediate consequence, a diplomatic crisis on rails. Insult echoed in mosques and barracks. Patience evaporated by sundown. Princes abroad picked sides faster. Courtiers at home learned how far ceremony would bend before breaking. For clarity, this is analysis, not endorsement. Humiliation can win compliance and guarantee retaliation in the same breath. The gesture clarified more than any treaty. Here, etiquette obeyed policy, not the other way around. Scribes recorded the audience. Rumor delivered the transcript with extra barbs by the next market day. Lines hardened, tribute became pretext. The frontier felt its pulse race like a war drum. Next, steel would replace protocol. The hunter would overreach, and a famed commander would fall into his hands. Hamza Pasha was riding, and the stagecraft of fear was about to gain a prisoner. Scouts reported a raiding column under Hamza Pasha, probing valleys and testing garrisons. He let them penetrate, then snapped the cage with ravines, fires, and falling trees. Trumpets screamed from ridgelines. Arrows stitched the road while cavalry folded the retreat. Hamza's guard broke. Horses flailed. The commander found authority suddenly pedestrian and cornered. Chronicles differ on timing, yet agree on outcome. The Ottoman captain entered custody alive. He staged the capture like a tutorial, letting villages witness rank reduced to frightened bone. What happens when a famed hunter feels rope and recognizes himself as the lesson? Immediate consequence. Frontier garrisons paused, calculating risks. Istanbul counted weeks, supplies, and replacements. Neutral note. This fused warfare and pedagogy, converting victory into a traveling lecture on hierarchy. Hamza's sentence followed doctrine, public, paced, and designed to echo through barracks. Officers read it correctly. Talent might be prized, but immunity lived only in rumors. The capture emboldened him. If a spearhead bends, perhaps whole campaigns can be delayed. Momentum gathered for one night of blades and torches aimed at the Sultan's tent. Summer 1462 baked the Danube frontier. Torches mapped approaches better than anxious scouts. He split detachments into needles, assigning watchwords, targets, and lanes through sleeping rows. Passwords mimicked Ottoman drill. Smoke blurred uniforms. Panic, not strength, became the weapon. The aim was simple. Reach the Sultan's pavilion before routine rebuilt the camp's spine. Horses slid between guy ropes. Drummers woke wrong, beating alarms into greater confusion. Accounts differ on how close he came. Most place him within breath and fury. Fires leapt, carts crashed, constellations vanished behind a lid of ash and frightened lungs. Neutral note: this was commando theater. Doctrine arranged to fracture command before dawn. He paired raids with fouled wells and stripped fields, planting winter inside bright summer. Do you win by killing bodies, or by bankrupting sleep for everyone wearing armor? Immediate results appeared in ledgers. Rations spoiled, marches slowed, and confidence developed a limp. Mehmed answered with mass and patience, rebuilding rhythms and forcing the frontier to hold. Then the column reached an unseen border, a gallery of stakes rewriting policy in silence. Night warfare had taught fear to whisper. Daylight would make it shout across 20,000 poles. Dawn lifted a gray lid, and the road dissolved into a gallery of stakes. Standards drooped, veterans gagged, horses shied from the smell rising like a poison marsh. Some poles carried uniforms, others carried messages carved where eyes would be forced to linger. Chroniclers disagree on totals, but agree the arrangement optimized dread, not death nor mercy. Wind turned the field into a metronome, clicking warnings that traveled farther than scouts. What does command weigh when even lieutenants cannot keep breakfast where it belongs? The near-term outcome was brutal simplicity. Marches slowed, council courage thinned, logistics lost rhythm. Mehmed measured the tableau, then rerouted, steel respectful of silence, numbers respectful of nausea. Even hardened janissaries recalculated risk. Bravery fought new enemies named stench, spectacle, and sleep. This was strategy taught with carpentry, a curriculum that rewired reflexes faster than sermons. Villages nearby surrendered provisions. Pathfinders drifted wide. Entropy started working on his schedule. Yet victory here also recruited witnesses who would later remember permission, not just fear. The stage compelled obedience today and quietly rehearsed cruelty others might copy tomorrow. From this silence of poles, the argument advanced toward cost, what terror buys and what it burns. In the short run, deterrence performed like artillery, clearing paths without spending soldiers. Caravans paid, envoys softened, letters arrived punctually, and treasuries finally breathed between campaigns. But every demonstration taught lieutenants that fear could replace persuasion wherever patience felt expensive. Administrations built on dread often ossify. They answer questions with echoes, not with explanations. What remains to govern when deterrence becomes identity and cruelty becomes the default verb? Close allies grew brittle. Confidants hoarded secrets. Initiative shrank to whatever pleased the sovereign. Peasants complied from calculation, then hid their sons, their grain, and eventually their prayers. Merchants paid tariffs, then moved warehouses by moonlight, voting with wagons and missing inventories. He gained time, yet spent legitimacy, the coin required to rebuild after emergencies finally quieted. Even victory taxed his state because spectacle is hungry. It demands carpenters, stenographers, and silence. Silence, once institutionalized, stalls intelligence. Warnings arrive late, shaded by fear of punishment. So the machine that frightened enemies also blinded rulers, an exchange rate nobody advertises aloud. This bargain would follow him into captivity, where reputation survived iron and appetite survived leisure. The next chapter leaves the throne for chains and tests whether habit can live in prison. The road narrowed to a chamber. Iron replaced ceremony, and windows learned discretion. He found himself a guest again, this time of Hungarian hospitality spelled in legal Latin. Rooms were tidy, routines strict, conversations curated by men who smiled with accountable penmanship. Ancient sources report he was confined years. Accounts differ on comfort, guard, and the leash length. Rumors multiplied that he practiced cruelty on vermin. Evidence is fragmentary, yet the story persisted. Captivity sharpened his brand even in absence. Fear, it seemed, didn't require fresh performances. What is a ruler without stagecraft? Do policies survive when the audience and carpenters vanish? Near term, patrons cooled but did not forget. Enemies relaxed, never fully sleeping on his name. Neutral note: reputation can outlive agency, doing slow work that steel once hurried along. He studied ledgers, wrote careful letters, and mapped who feared him versus who only envied. Scribes noted that ransom and leverage arrive together. Mercy, if any, arrives on separate carts. He treated time like currency, saving attention for the alliances that might reopen doors. The machine of dread rested but did not rust. Its instructions remained memorized in bone. When release finally came, it read like a footnote. The main text awaited revision on horseback. He would ride home briefly and the playbook would return. tighter, harsher, and fatally compressed by circumstance. He crossed the border like a rumor returning. Familiar cadence, heavier silences, fewer apologies. The throne accepted him cautiously. Courtiers bowed while counting exits and cousins with plausible claims. He moved quickly, as if time itself had learned to charge interest on doubt. Supporters received rewards shaped like warnings. Skeptics received warnings shaped like arithmetic and wood. Ancient sources report a cruelty turned inward. Accounts differ, yet speak of families made to witness. The aim was surgical terror, break conspiracies at the table, not on the battlefield in snow. What loyalty can grow in rooms where love and fear are forced to stare? Immediate effects appeared. Plots thinned, letters shortened, and oaths acquired that glassy, brittle shine. Neutral observation. Compressed reigns incentivize extremity. Moderation purchases futures that short governments never reach. Markets breathed, then tensed. Priests blessed, then paused. Captains saluted and rechecked road contingencies. He rehearsed daytime order and nighttime ruthlessness, trusting rhythm more than any council's eloquence. Yet enemies travel lighter than kings. They carry rumors, coins, and a patient winter. Skirmishes nipped supply lines. Allies proved seasonal. The map began subtracting safe places. He sensed the ledger turning against him and still doubled down on messages and timber. Next came the last campaign, where momentum and luck divorced, and ahead became a warning. Snow or dust, sources differ, but the last pursuit ended in thorns and shouting. Standards tangled with branches, guides misread gullies. The map edited itself under hooves. He fought where tracks narrowed, trusting surprise and speed against a heavier, patient enemy. Blades met at bad angles. Messengers vanished. Orders traveled slower than panic through brush. Ancient sources report two endings, cut down in flight or cornered and refusing quarter. Either way, the ledger closed in iron. The audience, at last, was imperial. What does a realm salvage when its warning is paraded as a warning against itself? Immediate consequence. A severed head rode south, displayed to certify victory and cauterize rumor. Crowds stared. Courtiers rehearsed relief. Scribes annotated the jawline to silence second-hand legends. Neutral note, empires love trophies because trophies legislate without debates, signatures, or appeals. Supporters scattered to plausible loyalties. Enemies wrote tidy summaries that history still quotes. Merchants unlocked warehouses. Priests changed tenses. Border captains updated prayer and patrol schedules. The machine of fear lost its operator, but not its echoes. Habit lingers. Villages remembered order mixed with dread. Rivals remembered dread mixed with opportunity. From a pole in a capital to a statue in a hometown, memory split. And the next chapter explores how one life became two stories, marching away from each other. At home, some praised the strict hand that made roads safe and markets punctual. They remembered toll gates obeying hours, thieves fearing dawn, and officials learning arithmetic in public. Abroad, pamphlets preserved forests of stakes, turning a frontier prince into a continental menace. Museums curate both. Proclamations of order beside engravings that smell of ash and iron. Anniversaries tell on themselves. One village lays wreaths, another reads broadsheets with tightened throats. Statues raise chins against clouds. Classrooms lower voices when examples require discretion and caveats. Can a nation honor resilience without baptizing cruelty to make the story coherent? Near-term identity hardened. Critics called it apology, admirers called it context. Both half right. Neutral observation. Memory is a tool. It can repair dignity or sharpen denial. Tourism learned the names. Vendors sold legends. Scholars argued footnotes with tired precision. Absolving a ruler risks teaching successors the wrong lesson about cost and consent. Condemning him only risks ignoring how fragile states often choose deterrence over dialogue. The split persisted in parades, curricula, and quarrelsome evenings where families disagreed gently, then not. Two Vlads walked the map, guardian against invaders, butcher of innocence, rarely shaking hands in public. To separate myth from man, we need to exit the castle of fiction. Next, we meet Dracula, a shadow that drank the oxygen of history and blurred its warnings. Centuries later, a novelist bottled fear into a gentleman with elegant appetites. Castles gained candlelit staircases. Peasants became extras. History learned to wear a cape. Printers sold the myth globally. Stage and screen kept refilling the goblet for applause. The real prince dwindled to a footnote under fangs that never truly existed. Neutral note: fiction clarifies emotions while muddying facts. It explains dread, not fiscal policy. What happens when a metaphor outsells the man and entertainment outruns evidence by miles? Near term, teachers fight for nuance. Viewers merge timelines. Cruelty gets rebranded as supernatural hunger. Tour guides juggle ticket sales with caveats. Scholars sigh into microphones, then keep explaining. The myth masks logistics: patrol schedules, carpentry, and the cost of nails and ink. It also masks context: border panic, dynastic chess, and pamphlets weaponizing arithmetic. Fiction isn't guilty, but it is loud. It can drown the caution history meant. Audiences love monsters, administrators fear precedents, especially the kind that feel efficient. So we must return to comparative frames: intent, scale, and machinery, before handing out verdicts. Next, we weigh him against modern tyrants: mass systems versus frontier deterrence, doctrine versus indulgence. Modern tyrants build factories of ruin, ministries, quotas, spreadsheets, and refrigerated trains. Their cruelty industrializes. It scales by bureaucracy, not merely charisma and rumor. Our prince ran a leaner operation: fewer levers, louder signals, and a smaller tax base. Neutral observation: tools differ, outcomes rhyme, intent ranges from survival calculus to performative delight. Which horror is worse: systematic extermination by office hours or artisanal terror advertised on roads? In the near term, false equivalence hinders judgment. Policy needs categories, not theatrical shortcuts. He weaponized spectacle to hold borders. They weaponize systems to redesign whole populations. Both teach a grim lesson: fear is cheap to start, costly to stop. Lieutenants learn quickly that threats outperform debates until trust collapses and innovation starves. Bureaucratic cruelty hides behind memos. Theatrical cruelty hides behind applause and frightened silence. Either way, societies pay afterward with missing courage, quiet conspiracies, and half-empty cradles. Comparisons should illuminate, not launder. Praise discipline without baptizing brutality into moral necessity. Understanding difference helps design guardrails: laws, norms, and habits that penalize shortcuts to dread. From there, we return to memory politics: how nations curate villains into guardians or warnings. Next, we ask who profits when anniversaries forget costs and posters outshine footnotes. Memory committees argue budgets, sculptors argue angles, textbooks argue verbs more than dates. Some communities need pride to survive, others need caution to prevent repetition with new uniforms. Neutral note: commemoration is policy disguised as granite. It funds certain futures over others. Who decides when resilience ends and excuse begins? And what happens to dissenting families? Near-term, curricula tilt. Parades shape children's instincts. Tourists carry edited legends home. If the story crowns deterrence, later leaders inherit permission slips already signed by statues. If the story crowns victims, civic spine may wilt when border storms gather again. The honest path is harder. Honor endurance, name harms, and budget for transparent repairs. That means archives open, trials remembered, and administrative habits measured against living dignity. It also means museum labels that teach logistics and costs, not just Gothic mood. Citizens learn to spot shortcuts: sarcasm nailed to skulls, numbers trumpeted without receipts. They practice the slow courage of procedure, the kind tyrants always try to rush. Do we want safety that lasts, or fear that performs and then devours its makers? Hold that question for the closing beat, where consequences step forward and the next investigation invites you in. Two near consequences stand out, and neither waits for historians. First, fear buys speed today, but invoices tomorrow. It leaves institutions brittle and citizens rehearsed for silence. Markets reopen under threat, then migrate at night. Intelligence dries up because punishment outshouts warnings. Second, myth pays faster than nuance. It sells tickets, then smuggles permission back into politics. A ruler's spectacle becomes a tradition's shortcut, and the appetite for results outruns the appetite for rights. Third, the craft of terror is memorized easily. Carpentry, schedules, and rumors survive longer than their authors. Neighbors copy what works, until everybody governs with echoes and nobody trusts doors at dusk. So the task is stubborn and practical: reward procedure, fund transparency, and design boredom into power. Teach citizens to ask for receipts when numbers roar. Teach officers to value slow, lawful wins. Museums should explain costs. Courts should remember names. Schools should stage debates that outshine legend. This isn't moralizing, it's maintenance, the quiet infrastructure that keeps monsters from feeling efficient. And it leaves a question to carry forward. Can a state deter wolves without teaching its shepherds to bite? Next time, we'll test that question against another border genius of fear. Different tools, similar temptations, and a choice that still stalks our headlines.